Young Christmas Winokur and Joe Sullivan share a passion for making toys, and they proudly display their creations for sale. Joe becomes their first official customer, purchasing one of the toys, and the two vow to always create toys together. Fast forward 22 years, Chris is now the CEO of CJ Toys, while Joe works in his family's antique store. Kathleen, the CEO of the prominent corporate toy company Arlo Toys, approaches Chris with an exciting proposal. As she plans to retire, Kathleen wants to leave her company in capable hands and suggests merging Arlo Toys with CJ Toys to create a brand new enterprise. Chris is thrilled by the opportunity and eagerly agrees to the merger. However, before the merger can be announced, Kathleen explains that Joe, a co-founder of CJ Toys, must also sign off for it to proceed. After Kathleen leaves, Chris confides in her assistant, Alicia, that Joe abruptly left the company after a heated argument about its direction, and she hasn't spoken to him in over 7 years. Now that's a big problem. Chris calls her sister Heather, who shares that she and her husband Todd are heading off on the UK Christmas folk tour for a few weeks. Heather asks Chris to look after their daughter, Emma, during their absence. Chris initially refuses due to the pressure of the Arlo Toys merger, but Heather eventually persuades her to take on the responsibility. Soon after, Heather and Todd drop Emma off at Chris's place, along with a long list of instructions. Chris, who hasn't spent much time with Emma since she was little, has an awkward first interaction with her niece. The next day, Chris takes Emma to her audition at school, but remains preoccupied with work calls. On her way back to the office, Santa Claus overhears her mentioning Joe and tells her he's now working at his father's antique store just down the street. Later, Chris is late in picking up Emma from her school audition and finds her looking downcast after being unable to perform her original song. She cheers Emma up, promising they'll find another opportunity for her to showcase her song. They stop by Sullivan's antique store, where Joe is surprised to see Chris after years. Expecting an easy sign-off for the merger, Chris is shocked when Joe flatly refuses. Joe and Chris clash over their differing views. Joe opposes corporate takeovers and prioritizes the company's value, while Chris focuses on sustaining the business and profit. While browsing the store, Emma notices gifts and learns about Joe's annual toy drive Jamboree, which benefits children's homes. Joe agrees to sign off on the deal if Chris volunteers for the event, but Chris offers a donation instead. Joe insists on her participation, and after some persuasion from Emma and Joe, she finally agrees, believing it will be fun. The next morning, over breakfast, Emma urges Chris to take a broken ballerina doll she found in the basement to Joe for repairs. Emma wonders why Chris doesn't like Joe, and Chris reveals they were once best friends, but a disagreement causes a rift between them. At the shop, Joe confides in Tucker that he wants Chris to leave her corporate world temporarily and reconnect with her love for toy making through the Jamboree. Tucker suggests Joe still has feelings for Chris, but Joe dismisses it, insisting it's been too long. It seems Chris can't disconnect from work, as she's on a call while entering the shop. Joe introduces her to the other volunteers, and she hands over the broken ballerina for him to fix for Emma. As Joe assigns tasks, he asks for a volunteer to join him at Pleasant Park. When Chris waves to Nick, dressed as Santa and heading out, Joe quickly puts her on task, leaving her no chance to correct the situation. At the park, Joe and Chris measure the space and nearly disagree over how many booths and attendees it can accommodate. It feels like there's more behind the tension, though. Joe mentions there will be a stage for performances, and Chris shares that Emma is a songwriter and singer. This makes Joe suggest Emma perform at the Jamboree, much to Emma's excitement. Emma spots some Christmas trees for sale and suggests they get one for Chris, whose house is completely lacking holiday spirit. Joe, surprised that Chris doesn't have a tree, eagerly takes charge of Emma. Back at Chris's house, the trio decorates, transforming the space with festive cheer. During the fun, Chris receives a call from Kathleen, who reminds her of an upcoming meeting with the Arlo Toys board to present her data for the merger. When asked about Joe, Chris confidently reassures Kathleen that everything will be ready in time. Later, after Emma is tucked into bed, Joe opens up about how much Chris means to him, revealing he's kept a childhood toy they made together. Chris is touched, and it's clear she feels the same. Perhaps there's hope for their friendship after all. The next morning, Chris, exhausted from working all night, is woken by a video call from Heather. She brings Emma into the call, and Emma excitedly shares that she'll be performing her original song at Joe's Jamboree. Heather and Todd promise to return in time to watch her perform. At the office, Emma wonders why there aren't any toys on display in a toy company, prompting Chris to pull some from storage. While reviewing them, Chris focuses on a speaking toy phone, confident it's popular, based on her research. Emma, however, finds it lame and suggests asking kids directly for feedback. She proposes donating the toys for the Jamboree, except for the toy phone, of course. Over at the antique store, Joe admits he's been working on new toy designs, but doesn't know how to put it out there, because it was Chris who excelled at presenting new ideas when they were together. Joe also confesses the shop isn't his dream, and with Tucker retiring soon, he's struggling to reconnect with his passion for toy making. When Chris learns Joe and Tucker are having trouble attracting people to movie night, where attendees donate toys and enjoy a film, she offers to help promote it through her social media team. Her kind gesture surprises Joe, who sincerely thanks her. During movie night, the venue is packed, thanks to Chris's efforts, and it seems she and Joe are finally making progress in mending their estranged relationship as they watch the film together. However, things take a turn when Kathleen arrives with toys for donation, surprising Chris. As Chris introduces Joe to Kathleen, he immediately criticizes her digital drone toy, claiming he makes more meaningful toys. To diffuse the tension, Chris sends Joe to get popcorn and apologizes to Kathleen. Concerned, Kathleen worries that Joe might be a problem for the merger, but Chris reassures her. Frustrated with Joe's behavior, Chris tells him she'll sit with Emma instead. Just like that, it seems they're back to square one. The next day, Joe apologizes to Chris for his behavior the night before, and with her soft spot for him, she can't stay angry for long. When she mentions picking up Emma for her last day of school before winter break, Joe excitedly suggests they go out to celebrate. Though Chris, ever the workaholic, initially resists due to her workload, Joe reminds her she used to be more fun, convincing her to join him. While skating, Emma confides her nerves about the performance, worried about what others will think of her song. Joe encourages her to just be herself, even performing his own song with loud confidence, though off-key, to show her it doesn't matter what people think. He gets Chris and Emma to join in, and in a playful mishap, Chris and Joe fall to the ground, with Chris ending up on top of him. They share a laugh, enjoying the moment as they look at each other. Later, Nick arrives in his Santa costume and invites them to the Christmas cafe reopening. Chris, being Chris, makes another excuse about work, but eventually gives in when Emma pleads, especially since Emma's never been there and Chris just can't resist a good fudge. At the cafe, Joe and Chris reminisce about favorite childhood memories tied to the place, which eventually leads to the topic of the company. Joe admits he left because the direction the company was heading didn't align with their original vision. Not wanting to spoil the moment, they set the topic aside and continue sharing fond memories. Back at the store, Chris and Joe start sorting toys into categories, but soon get distracted, ending up playing with the toys and sharing a fun, lighthearted moment. Joe surprises Chris by bringing out the toys they made together years ago, and she's touched to see he kept them all. While going through Joe's current toy designs, Chris suggests a brilliant improvement, which reminds Joe of how well they worked together as a team, at least until things fell apart. Joe tries to make her see that she strayed from the original vision they started with, but Chris argues that change was necessary to stay competitive. She explains that money and responsibilities now matter more because they're no longer kids. Joe disagrees, leaving Chris feeling dejected. It seems this is one issue they'll never see eye to eye on. The next day at the store, Joe confides in Tucker that Chris makes him feel complete, but her work-first mindset always creates a rift. Tucker advises him to embrace her strengths and remember that everyone needs balance in their life. Meanwhile, outside the store, Nick finds Chris on a work call and encourages her to trust that things will work out as they're meant to, reminding her to let go and see what tomorrow brings. Taking his advice to heart, Chris joins Joe at the Christmas cafe, playing games and enjoying a carefree, fun-filled moment together. The next day at the office, Alicia informs Chris that the board meeting has been moved up and she's already late. Rushing to the meeting, Chris apologizes for her tardiness and begins her presentation. Meanwhile, Joe and Emma are busy setting up the stage for the Jamboree. Emma gets Joe to promise he'll always stay friends with Chris no matter what. Back at the office, Chris successfully finishes her presentation. After the board members leave, Kathleen comments that it wasn't as polished as it could have been due to Chris being late, but assures her she'll handle any follow-ups. Kathleen suggests they review future toy designs, but Chris, feeling torn, explains she has to set up for the toy drive. Later that night, Emma, playing matchmaker, suggests Chris marry Joe so he could be her uncle, and adds bonus points for their shared love of toys. Chris laughs it off and tucks Emma into bed. The next day, at the Toy Drive Jamboree, the venue is buzzing with people enjoying the festivities. Chris admires how Joe has channeled his love for toys into giving back, prompting him to admit he started the Jamboree to fill the void after leaving her and the company. Their conversation is interrupted when Heather and Todd arrive, excited to see Emma's performance. Emma's performance is a hit, with her heartfelt song touching everyone, even prompting Joe and Chris to slow dance, caught up in their emotions. Later, Kathleen arrives at the Jamboree, excited to share the good news. The board has approved the merger with Chris as CEO. However, they still need Joe's signature to make it official. Overwhelmed and speechless, Chris assures Kathleen they'll get it, admitting the merger is everything she's ever wanted. But as Kathleen leaves, Chris is conflicted, her mixed emotions revealing that the merger might not be everything she wants after all. At the end of the event, Joe finds Chris in a quiet moment and confesses his love for her, admitting he's always had feelings but didn't want to risk their friendship. Chris, touched, admits she feels the same way. However, she believes nothing will work between them because he's in love with a version of her that no longer exists. She also tells him she's secured the merger. Joe asks if it's really what she wants, but Chris firmly replies that it's everything she's worked for. Disappointed, Joe wishes her luck in getting what she wants, telling her he'll never stand in her way. The next day, Chris wakes up feeling gray and sad. When she sees Joe's signature on a file on her desk, the feeling deepens. Later, she meets up with Nick at the park to donate toys to the children. Watching the kids play with the toys fills her heart with warmth. Nick shares that creating joy is what Christmas is all about, leaving Chris with a reflective question of whether what she's doing in life truly brings that kind of joy. At Arlo Toys, Chris admires a snow globe, and Kathleen explains it was a gift from her ex-husband. She admits her work-life imbalance cost her time with her family, something Chris can relate to. Kathleen, hoping to make things right in her retirement, arranges the contract and hands Chris a pen to sign. Meanwhile, at the store, Joe confides in Tucker about his situation with Chris. Tucker reminds him that just because things aren't going as planned doesn't mean they won't work out, advising Joe not to let Chris slip away again. Determined, Joe heads to the company, only to be disappointed when Alicia tells him that Chris is at Arlo Toys and may have already gone through with the merger. Feeling deflated, he leaves the ballerina he fixed for Chris with Alice before walking out. Meanwhile, at the Christmas cafe, Emma excitedly tells Heather and Chris that her school wants her to perform her song at next year's concert, and they both celebrate her success. Chris confides in Heather that she's nervous about approaching Joe with her idea, but feels it's the right decision. Heather encourages her to be honest and open. Chris heads to the store and surprises Joe by telling him she didn't go through with the merger. She opens up about wanting to start fresh with him, making toys together, and bringing joy to people's lives because they make a great team. She envisions a company where they can be true to themselves and pursue their childhood dreams. Joe is speechless, and Chris, with a deep sense of clarity, admits she's in love with him. She leans in, and they share a heartfelt, perfect kiss. 1 year later, at the first Christmas party of Cornerstand Toys, Chris and Joe's company, joy fills the air as Alicia announces one of their toys is officially number 3 for Christmas. Chris feels a deep sense of contentment, realizing that the joy from the kids playing with the toy is enough for her. With everything falling into place for both of them, Chris and Joe share a passionate kiss to the cheers of everyone present, marking the perfect end to a wonderful night.